love this type of videos. Greetings, my name is Nina, welcome back to my channel. I haven't filmed in a while. So I do really like hearing people mention their favorite books. I've made a few other videos on my favorite books, and yet the list have changed. However, a lot of books remain the same. I still love them through the years. So I thought of my favorites and I realized that there are so far 28 favorite books of mine, and in this video I'm going to talk about them. Fun fact, I did film a video about my favorite books back in late July 2025. However, at the time I wasn't well and I could hardly speak. And also this time I came up with an interesting concept. So the list is in absolutely random order, although I tend to mention a certain book at the very end. So let's get started. Yeah, one book happened to be on the surface, so let's start with this one. So there is a pop rock band with a lot of fans. There is a singer and there is a fangirl. Their paths cross. What could possibly go wrong? I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. I will talk very briefly about each book. 10 people, an island. Each one of those people has a skeleton in the closet. What happens next is pretty horrifying. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. The whole world went crazy over these books about some random lords fighting each other for power, and then there's lots of magic, and it became a worldwide phenomenon. I think there was also a certain HBO show. Okay, never mind. A Song of Ice and Fire series by George R. R. Martin. I have a video dedicated to the series named Watch This Before You Get into A Song of Ice and Fire. An obedient boy. Lots of studying. A gymnasium. Lots of rules. What could possibly go wrong? Beneath the Wheel by Hermann Hesse. So, I have a video dedicated to this book, feel free to check it out. The only thing that I did not mention in that video, but that's because I did not know about it, is that there's a thrash metal song by DRI named Beneath the Wheel, and it's based on this book. And there is this line, school's a job but you don't get paid. A hotel, a little boy, parallel worlds. There is a search, there is a bad guy, a kid who can't accept the existence of a parallel world, and a very sympathetic character called Wolf. The Talisman by Stephen King. I am actually considering reading The Black House, the direct sequel to The Talisman. Maybe I will. I've talked a lot about this book already, so moving on. What happens when all the cliches about mean girls from teen movies are turned into horror, where there is a lot of madness, and how it affects the main character's mental health? Bunny by Mona Avad answers this. Should I say Mona Avad or Mona Avad? Mona Avad? Correct me, please. Special thanks to the YouTuber The Book Leo for introducing her audience to this novel. And by the way, I recently finished rereading it. It's still great. What's going to happen if a little girl whose life is miserable at the orphanage finds a mysterious book and learns from the book? Then you get Molly Moon's incredible book of hypnotism by Georgia Bing. I think that a lot of people have not heard of this book, but this is a childhood favorite of mine. I read it a lot back in the day. However, I prefer the first one over the second and third. I know that there are more books, but I only read the first 3 and I mostly preferred the first one. I thought the second one was too boring and the third one was too thrilling for me. So you have 2 characters. You have a madman, a really crazy guy who survived the most insane things ever. And then you have a young girl who is very much traumatized and surrounded by very unlikely people. What's going to happen when their paths cross and they both would turn out to have magic powers? Then you are going to get Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first one, The Final Empire. So far I only read the first one and it impressed me a lot. For some reason I did not continue the series, but I loved the first book very much. By the way, I forgot to mention that I used to have paperback versions of these books, and I finally replaced them with hardcovers. So the first book finally matches books 2 and 3 that are in hardcovers. Oh yeah, everybody knows this story about some kid in clothes that are way too big for him, and his hair is messy and nobody really loves him until he gets letters that change his life. And yeah, this is a very obscure series. These series are so obscure that there were 8 movies based on the 7 books in the series, and a lot of people were obsessed. Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. Yeah, very obscure. Very obscure. A quiet guy lives in his very cozy house. He would have continued living peacefully, but then there were guys who needed a burglar. And so in the hole in the ground there lived The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah, this very small book that suddenly became 3 blockbuster movies, which is very strange. Okay, 2 blockbuster movies would have been fine, but 3? I don't think so. So, a very smart schoolboy, an old man with a criminal past. The boy discovers the truth, and what happens next is madness. Apt Pupil by Stephen King, and finally I got a separate version. So for those of you who do not know, Apt Pupil is a part of 4-story compilation named Different Seasons, and Apt Pupil is novella number 2, and I liked the novella so much I knew I wanted a separate copy. And now I actually have Apt Pupil in 3 editions. So this one, my old Different Seasons edition, and I also got the Russian version of said compilation. But I'm glad that I have a separate copy of Apt Pupil. A boy with red hair plays a lute. He also acts, and he tries to survive in a world that isn't necessarily kind to him, and he makes a name for himself, both for his wits and for his music and for his unlikely situation, and he lives to tell the tale. The Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss. This is the first book, The Name of the Wind. So around the late 60s, 4 guys in England, they met and decided to form a band, and then in 1970 they released their first full album, and that was the birth of the whole music genre and its subgenres. A History of Heavy Metal by Andrew O'Neill. Yeah, you got that right. This is a biography of the heavy metal genre and its subgenres. And this is something I would recommend not only for the newcomer metal fans, but also for the long-time metal fans. I have a video on my channel dedicated to this book. Feel free to check it out. Wow, this trilogy became the basis for the 3 excellent movies that people love and watch to this day. And this book has 4 little fellas, a piece of jewelry, and a character that nearly everybody loves when they watch the films. Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. At the time of filming, I am reading this trilogy for the 4th time, and I am on book 6. aka I read the first 2 books and the first half of Return of the King, and I stopped. For those of you who do not know, each of the Lord of the Rings books is divided into 2 books, so basically there are 6 parts in the whole trilogy, and I have only part 6 left to read, so this is the half of Return of the King. I have only this one left. And after that, I can say that I have read Lord of the Rings 4 times. And I have already made this confession, and I'm going to say it again. I love the films more. 5 years ago, a murder case was solved. Or so people thought. What's going to happen when a girl decides that it isn't over, that there's more to uncover? She decides to take the matter in her own hands, and then we get A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Gonna confess that I prefer mostly the first book in the series. I liked books 2 and 3. However, the first one was the most impressive, and the third one was the most horrifying. So here you have the 80s, during Soviet times, and there's this young kid who thinks that the summer is going to be horrible. But then he meets a guy who instantly becomes his friend. There's friendship and there is a lot of classical music, particularly Tchaikovsky. And the whole story is told in a flashback. And so the book is Summer in a Pioneer Time by Yelena Malisova and Katerina Silvanova. So the book is translated into English as Pioneer Summer, a novel, and the cover sucks. They should have kept original cover. Maybe because of copyright they couldn't or whatever, but still, the original cover is much better. I have a separate video dedicated to Summer in a Pioneer Time. Feel free to check it out, where I talk about this book. Following Summer in a Pioneer Time, we have another book set in the 80s, and it's also about teen boys. Aristotle and Dante discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alireza. This is the first part, Aristotle and Dante series. The second one is called Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that Summer in a Pioneer Time has a sequel too. It's called What the Swallow is Silent About. However, I'm not a fan of that one and I do not have it. I do have the sequel for this one. 80s, two teen boys. A similar topic. In this book, there's a society that lives the same. Everything is same. Everyone is the same. And there's a boy who also lives the same, but that's about to change. What could possibly go wrong? To answer this question, you have The Giver by Lois Lowry. This is a book that I read in a few hours. It became a favorite on the next day. What's going to happen if a social worker is sent to make reports on an orphanage with unusual kids that are actually magical beings? To answer this question, you have The House in a Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. So after I read this book, I realized that I want to read more T.J. Klune, and I have already read Wolf Song. However, I did not like that one. This one, on the other hand, is in this video. So there is an academia, and there are two very talented boys who want to have superpowers by having a near-death experience. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So next I have two books by the same author, and they're set in the same universe. So in the first story you have an elvish princess and a mortal guy, and also some shiny diamonds. So in the first story you have an elvish princess and a mortal man and a shiny rock, and also a talking dog. And the second story features a very troubled and cursed young man who goes through a lot. It also features his sister. It also features the guy who cursed him, and also the same man's friend with a tragic fate. What would happen if the elvish princess and the mortal man cross paths? And what would happen if this guy from a cursed family goes on a journey that leads everybody to their doom? To answer the first question, you have Bern and Luthien, and to answer the second question, you have Children of Húrin, both by J.R.R. Tolkien, both set in Middle-earth. Yeah, this is basically a fairy tale. And then you have a young man who makes a lot of questionable choices. It's very dark. And in contrast to Bern and Luthien, the Children of Húrin is a very dark and gloomy story. And the next one features a unicorn, a loser wizard, and an old lady who escapes a gang. What would happen if these three characters crossed paths? What would happen if the wizard and the lady decide to help the unicorn? To answer this question, you have The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. Fun fact about this book, this is Patrick Rothfuss's favorite book, and he did the introduction to this book. Allow me to read it to you. I love this book. That's the only truly important thing I have to say here. So, if you are standing in a bookshop reading this introduction, wondering if you should buy this book and give it a try, the answer is yes. If someone gave you this book as a gift and you are looking for a new read, trying to decide if it might be worth your time, the answer is also yes. And because of this, I keep The Last Unicorn next to the Kingkiller Chronicle series. Well, it does help that both The Last Unicorn and the Kingkiller Chronicle are at least partially musically driven. Yeah, there's music here and in the Kingkiller Chronicle too. A boy is born in England, and that boy grows up to be a successful musician that, along with his friends, shaped the entire music genre. What's going to happen when there's fame and there are substances? To answer this question, you have I Am Ozzy by Ozzy Osbourne. So I have never been a huge Ozzy fan as a solo artist. So yeah, I do like the early Black Sabbath albums, but mostly the stuff they created, including Sabbath Bloody Sabbath album, and I think that was their peak. But since then, I did not like their stuff that much. I mean the Ozzy era. However, recently I did rediscover some of the songs, and no, this has nothing to do with Ozzy's death. And also I came across a few Ozzy solo songs, and yeah, good stuff. I'd say that Ozzy created heavier stuff in solo than with Black Sabbath. I recommend listening to Thunder Underground. It's a pretty heavy song, heavier than most of the Black Sabbath stuff. So in this book you have a boy who is pretty bullied at school, a grumpy old man, and a mysterious magical book. What's going to happen if the boy decides that the book is worth stealing? To answer this question, you have The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende, and this year I reread this book. It's still one of my top reads. Well, in general, Michael Ende is a pretty interesting author. I also read Momo this year. While that book did not become a favorite, it was still a pretty solid book. Now when I think about it, I think Michael Ende deserves a separate video. Sure, I only read 2 of his works. They're his most known works, yeah, Momo and The Never-Ending Story. So, if I have to create a list with my top 5 books, maybe even top 3, I don't know, this is going to be in the list. A grandiose book series where the first book feels like a very long introduction to something epic. A series where you have lots of storms, and then you have a young slave, a young girl who tries to help her family, and an old general. What would happen if these 3 very different characters would cross paths? What if they decide to change the world around them? Then you get The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I'd say that the first 2 books are the best. This is the first one, The Way of Kings. I haven't read Wind and Truth yet. I'm waiting for it to be translated. This is going to take time. So the next book features a very gifted young boy who is a 3rd child in his family, spaceships, an alien race that tries to destroy the boy's planet, and a lot of space battles, and a lot of neglectful adults. What could possibly go wrong? To answer this question, you have Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. By the way, fun fact, Orson Scott Card wrote a book that is one of my top favorite books, which is this one, and the book that is in my absolute hatred list. The same author wrote a book I loved and a book I hated. Not many authors managed to do this. And finally, the last book in this video. You have a little girl, an accordion player, and lots of burnt books. Yeah, what would happen if a girl decides to save the book instead of burning it? What would happen if the accordion player, who is also her adoptive father, would decide to do something that would cost his family a lot? To answer this question, you have The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. This is the book that I traditionally save to be the last. Yes, Ender's Game and The Book Thief are the books that I keep showing the last in my favorite books videos. Because when I think of my favorite books list, despite the books being in random order, the first book that comes to my mind is The Book Thief, and the second is Ender's Game. And so, that's all. These are my 28 favorite books so far. I made a huge mistake when I named certain books my favorites when they weren't supposed to be. It was a hit of the moment, I don't know. Maybe I simply wanted new favorites. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Name me your favorite books in the comments. See you next time. Goodbye.